Just as a brief introduction to myself, my name is Trishla and I'm a senior. And I'm one of the co-vice presidents of the academics committee. And today I'll be presenting about the intersection of energy and business, like what the energy sector looks like, the different sectors, like how the different sectors are evolving. And yeah, so first, as like a brief overview of the energy sector, the energy industry comprises first of like non-renewables and renewable energy. First, in the non-renewable space, there's the fossil fuel industry, which includes petroleum, coal industries, and the natural gas industries. And then there's the electrical power industry, which includes the electricity generation and the electricity power distribution and sales. Then we have the nuclear powered industry. And then in terms of the renewable space, we have alternative energy and sustainable energy companies, which includes those involved in hydroelectric power, wind power, and solar power generation, and those that manufacture, distribute, and sell alternative fuels. The traditional energy industry is also another sector, and that's based on the collection and distribution of firewood, and this is more so the case in poor industries, poor countries that have this traditional energy industry. This slide right here shows how the consumption is distributed among all the different sectors in the energy industry. First off, obviously the crude oil, coal, and natural gas industries are the ones that are dominating consumption right now, and renewables have a very low market share at the moment. However, renewables are the fastest growing energy sector, whereas other sectors have more stable growth. Worldwide, 85% of the energy comes from non-renewable sources, and the worldwide energy consumption has been increasing, and it's driven by economic growth and increasing demand in China, which is the world's largest energy user since 2009. Now we're going to move on to the largest sector in the energy industry, which is oil and gas, and looking more into like the different companies. So first off, the biggest energy or oil and gas companies are Sinopec, Shell, and Aramco, and these are massive companies, obviously, and they distribute oil and gas worldwide. Just as a brief overview of how this industry works, the energy sector companies in the oil and gas industry are usually categorized as upstream, midstream, and downstream on the basis of their operations. The upstream segment includes oil and gas exploration and production companies. These companies bring the commodities out from the ground. Companies like ConocoPhillips, EOG, and Apache Corporation are companies that operate in this segment. Oilfield services companies provides the services to upstream energy companies. Examples of these include Schlumberg and Halliburton. Then there are the midstream companies that process and transport extracted hydrocarbons through pipelines. Kinder Morgan, Enterprise Products Partners, and ONEOK are some of the largest midstream companies. As for the downstream components, they refine and distribute petroleum and gas products to retail outlets and customers. Phillips 66 and Holly Frontier are a couple of the companies operating in this value chain. Then there are integrated energy companies such as ExxonMobil and Chevron that operate across all three segments of the energy value chain, and these are clearly companies that are very well known and very big in this space. Now to talk about what drives the performance of these different companies and energy in general. The energy supply and demand, as well as the prices of energy commodities, drive the performance of energy companies. The demand and supply dynamics, in turn, actually drive the commodity prices. In terms of energy demand, a number of variables drive the long-term demand for energy. These include economic growth, technological development, consumer preferences, and government policies. Higher economic growth generally translates into increased demand for energy. However, improvements in energy efficiency can partially offset demand growth. In terms of energy supply, political events OPEC's actions and other factors affect the supply of oil and gas. The shale revolution has made the US the largest oil producing country in the world, for instance. Now is like a brief introduction about oil pricing. There are 161 different types of oil, each with its own consistency, chemical breakdown, and potential for use. And even though there are so many different forms of oil, we typically only cite one price for a barrel. This is because oil traders have selected the most widely used types of oil to determine the price per barrel. For instance, one common type of oil found and used in America is called the West Texas Intermediate, or WTI. West Texas Intermediate's popularity is due to it being light and sweet oil, which is easy to break down in the refining process. Since this oil is purchased quite frequently, it is used as an industry standard. Yeah, and crude oil and petroleum product prices are the result of thousands of transactions taking place around the world at any given moment at all levels of the supply chain, from the crude oil producer to the individual consumer. Oil markets are essentially a global auction. The highest bidder will win the most available supply. So crude oil is traded in the futures market. A futures contract is a standard contract to buy or sell a specific commodity of standardized quality at a certain date in the future. Crude oil is also traded on the spot transactions market. On the spot purchases of a single shipment for prompt delivery at the current market price defines the spot market. As for factors that impact the energy sector, we kind of discussed this before, but the energy sector is highly critical and sensitive to the macroeconomic environment. The level of economic activities exert a significant impact on the demand for oil and gas. So this means GDP, disposable income, employment, new housing, and industrial production index are some of the major macroeconomic drivers for the energy sector. In addition to the economic condition, the weather and seasons can also impact the energy sector. Gas prices are usually higher in the summer than in the winter, and this is partially due to more traveling in the summers and partially due to higher production costs for the summer grade fuels. Severe weather conditions such as hurricanes and natural disasters can damage infrastructure and disrupt the supply of energy. Strong and stable oil prices usually actually indicate economic health. Thus, some organizations coordinate energy suppliers and stabilize the markets. And one big organization that does this is OPEC. Moving on to a brief introduction of finance and energy. So just to characterize the different companies in the energy industry. The energy industry is known for large capital expenditures. Oh, sorry, I think there's a chat. Never mind. Yeah, so the energy industry is known for large capital expenditures, research and development spending, and legal expenses. Capital expenditures include prospecting land for oil reserves, property, plant and equipment, and transportation of oil. The research and development spending has been used to pay for adaptations to the changing market and environmental policy. Moreover, companies need to spend large amounts in research and development to be successful in order to stay ahead of the curve. For example, ExxonMobil spends over $1 billion each year in just R&D. Also, the government and environmental agencies are creating costs for the energy sector in their attempts to cut down carbon emissions. For example, ExxonMobil spent over $1 billion for legal expenses too. The legal costs for the energy sector stems from accidents. Therefore, energy companies hold cash aside for legal battles from incidents like oil spills. Yeah, and now just like as like an interesting topic to talk about is like different energy flubs, like different failures that have happened throughout history. So these are just like we're going to talk about some big companies in the space and different mistakes that they made. So one is Enron. And Enron was essentially a big oil and gas company, and they had a huge accounting scandal. And it was publicized in 2001 and led to the bankruptcy of the company. Enron was formed in 1985 by Kenneth Lay after merging Houston Natural Gas and Internorth. And several years later, when Jeffrey Skilling was hired, he developed a staff of executives that, by the use of accounting loopholes, special purpose entities, and poor financial reporting, were able to hide billions of dollars in debt from failed deals and projects. So Enron shareholders filed a $40 billion lawsuit after the company's stock price, which achieved a high of $90 per share in the mid-2000s, plummeted to less than $1 by the end of November 2001. Another huge energy flub is the BP oil spill. And on April 20th, 2010, the BP oil company's well blew out in a mile deep water in the Gulf of Mexico, which caused the Deepwater Horizon drill rig to explode, which killed 11 workers and injured 17 others. And this initiated one of the worst environmental disasters in American history. Over the course of 87 days, the nation watched in horror as numerous attempts to cap the gushing Macondo, which was the oil rig that failed. When the flow finally stopped on July 15th, 2010, an estimated 171 million gallons of oil had leaked into the highly productive and biodiverse Gulf of Mexico. And 1.8 million gallons of toxic chemical dispersants were used in response efforts. So this was just a huge mistake on BP's part, mainly due to negligence. And then another company and its flub is PG&E. PG&E is Pacific Gas and Electric, and they cut power to hundreds of thousands of Bay Area residents to mitigate the risk of fires. People were, for the most part, on their own as their homes and businesses were cast into darkness. During the blackouts, the CEO admitted that his company had not been prepared for the impact of the outages, including the crashing of the utility's website and call centers being overwhelmed with customers' concerns. One person even died because of the electric power outages because they didn't have power to a hospital, for instance. And the utilities estimates that each customer household represents about 3 people. So that means the power outages left roughly 2 million people in the dark. And then the CEO of the Pacific Gas and Electric Company told California energy regulators that the state will likely see blackouts for another 10 years because of the inefficiencies in their system. So yeah, that's like the end of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions about anything that we went through or would want to learn more? Also, if I'm not able to give a good response about all the different questions you guys have, feel free to email me. I'm gonna put my email in the chat so you guys can, so I can basically give a much better or more researched answer. And I'll give this answer in the next 24 hours.
All right, I have a quick question. I know you said something on one of the slides about the separation between upstream, midstream, and downstream energy companies. Mm-hmm. I was just wondering where the majority of energy companies tend to lie as far as, I know there's a wide range of them, but is there, let's just say, a higher density in the downstream market than in the upstream market, for instance? And also, which is the most profitable in general?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't have the answer to that, but I will, if you give me your email, I'll give you a detailed response.
Totally fine that you don't have an answer. It's kind of hard, and I added a bunch of things. Someone say something.
Huh?
Well, I know you're going to give a more detailed response, but off the top of your head, do you have any ideas where the big name players are?
Oh yeah.
Um,
So the big, like for instance, like Chevron and Shell, they don't focus on one sector like upstream or midstream or downstream. They're in all different areas of oil and gas. So they're pretty like vertically integrated.
okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of the biggest name players try to capitalize on all the distribution channels.
Yeah. Yeah. They're really powerful players and they're really big companies.
Okay, cool.
I have a quick question. What do you think about like the top players more so in like the alternative energy? Like I know there's Next Era Energy's market cap like recently surpassed, I think, was it Exxon or Chevron, something along those lines. I was wondering if you like know anything about like the future of that type of industry. I know they're like do utilities and electricity and a lot of solar.
Hmm.
But, like what do you think would be like a successful company in like 15 years around that stuff, or like some of these bigger ones actually able to diversify and become renewable leaders?
Hmm. Wait, I find it surprising that Next Era has passed, like, did you say Shell or Chevron?
I think it was Exxon possibly.
ExxonMobil
Yeah, I mean
in
that was
valuation?
mainly because of just like COVID and oil prices and everything, but it's like
Interesting.
kind of significant that their
Hmm.
market cap did recently surpass.
Yeah. Yeah, I will also email you because I don't think I have a good response right now because I didn't do that much research into the renewables industry just because it's like much smaller compared to oil and gas in terms
Yeah.
of business. So yeah.
Okay.
Next Gen LTE, right? Or what's the ticker symbol on that?
Next Era.
Okay, next era energy.
Yeah, Next Era, one word. So it's NE, I think is the ticker.
Okay. Oh yeah, that is big. 147 bill.
Oh wow.
That's bigger than I expected. I almost half expected. I know like Tesla and a bunch of even like Shell and like Chevron, or they have smaller renewable portfolios within their greater portfolio.
Hmm.
But I'm kind of surprised that a purely renewables is such a high market cap.
I don't think they're purely renewables. I mean, they just do a lot of electricity, but I think a fair share of their business propositions in like the last few months have been like developing solar plants and offshore wind, I think. But yeah, it's interesting to see if they will become competitors with the oil players in the US.
Oh wow. Wait, this is actually really interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was thinking about writing an article for this for that academics.
Oh, I see, I see. Yeah, because I think, yeah, I guess like people are betting more on renewables than they are in oil and gas. So that's why like they're valuing NextEra more than ExxonMobil.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Also, Trishla, if I can jump in about OPEC, um, a lot of it's basically an association of countries who have like a government controlled hold on their oil and natural gas holdings. So a lot of what's really interesting about OPEC is that you have also this kind of like diplomacy and international relations consideration that you have to have because these governments are controlling the supply of oil within their own countries.
Yeah, I can sort of add to that too. Like the nationally owned like oil companies specifically like in China, they're able to sort of like use nationally owned oil companies like in places in Africa to like create perfect supply chains for when like oil in Russia or oil in the Middle East plummets in some ways, so that they have like a totally independent supply chain. It's just interesting how like nationally owned versus like privately owned can play a huge part in like efficiencies and things like that.
Yeah, especially when they clash too, like when the US has to deal with OPEC, they're
Yeah,
not
completely. Like
happy.
you saw.
I'm just wondering when did America become? I remember you said something about the new technology that made America a leader in energy. And I'm wondering when that happens versus, again, like what Angela said with OPEC, because I know OPEC was huge, still is huge, but now we're kind of rivaling them, and I'm wondering what the future of that looks like.
Yeah, so I mentioned the shale revolution, which really allowed the US to start like creating its own like oil. So shale basically is like the combination of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling that enabled the US to increase the production of oil and natural gas. And this now accounts for 36% of the total US crude oil production. So it's like, so basically like since before, I guess the US is very dependent on like Middle Eastern companies, for instance, to be able to get a lot of its oil and gas. Once it developed technology for fracking, for instance, now it was able to get more of its oil and gas domestically.
If I can add on to that too, the US takes very high control over the technology because obviously they don't want other countries to know about it. So even like, I think I remember in like early 2000s, like there's very controlled like special privileges for like visiting students from like China, but they wouldn't like let them know like the specifics of the technology that they even came to study because they really don't want that to get into other countries' hands and then increase international or like would decrease the prices of their share holdings because other countries are able to extract more efficiently and do the same thing that we did. So right now the technology is still very much under wraps and hidden, or trying to at least. But other countries who are interested in also pursuing this technology are trying to develop concurrently to catch up.
Okay. And I know fracking is a huge thing in the election, for instance. So how do you think, I'm sorry for rapid firing questions, but how do you think the new government policies would kind of shape the energy industry and our standing against OPEC and against the rest of the world in energy holdings?
That's a super relevant question. Yeah, I guess it depends on what happens tomorrow and like the next, like this week, I guess, who's going to get elected. Because like Trump has made it very clear that he's very pro businesses, and many, like all businesses, don't really want to regulate how many carbon emissions that they emit. Because like right now in the short term, if they, I guess like they need more electricity and energy to be able to do the activities that they're doing. And if you tax, for instance, carbon, then it's going to limit the amount of products that they can generate, for instance. So Trump is very pro businesses, and he's going to do what the businesses want, which is essentially have no regulation in for like the environment, for instance. But I guess like if Biden is elected, he's going to be a little bit more like he's going to start putting more regulations in the industry. Yeah, so I like there has been some debate about what Biden would actually do in terms of fracking, because he has said that he's not going to ban fracking. Like he said he was only going to ban fracking in federal grounds, but that's it. So like it's kind of unclear what his stance is with fracking, I think. Like his stance might change later on. Like right now he's leaning very much in like the middle, trying to like appeal to both Republicans and Democrats for this election. But like once he's elected, and if we see if like the House and the Senate, for instance, is Democrat, he could have like a more harsh stance in terms of fracking. So I think it's like very dependent on what we see in the next few days, for instance.
Okay, thank you.
Also, if you think about like where there are shale deposits in the U.S., you can see that's very like highly politicized for the kind of like the swing states, because a lot of it is in Pennsylvania, like Ohio, a lot in the South too. So I guess the like what you're seeing now in terms of policy could be different because like they're really trying to target geographically these core like in the middle voters.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at a like a shale map right now. It looks like there's a lot in upstate New York, all through Pennsylvania, a surprising amount in Texas and the Great Lakes region. And it's a surprising amount. I didn't expect we had that many oil reserves still in the United States.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all for me.
Thank you for asking so many insightful questions.
Thanks to Trishla for this awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Second that.
Yeah, so like that's it on my end. I hope you guys have a great day and learned a lot from this presentation.
We hope you have a great day too. Good luck on your midterm.